See, words have meaning so that we can all communicate and understand what we are saying to each other. So we just randomly make... So what you're saying is, in your alternative fact world, FreeBSD is Linux.
This is Bad Voltage, Season 2, Episode 2. My name's Stuart Langridge, and I've got a bit of a cold and a laptop with no webcam.
Same here. I share the boobons. It's been here for a while now, so this is going to be fun for all of you people.
So we're both terribly ill. Jeremy, on the other hand...
I feel quite nice.
Yeah, it's two men with lung butter and one guy who, takes care of himself.
Yeah, I was going to say, one guy who goes jogging...
Idiot. So, anyway, welcome to the show. We've got some fun stuff to talk to you about. One thing we're going to talk about is we often talk about ChromeOS and we say, well, it's not really desktop Linux,
is it? We talked about it in the last show.
It's something else. It's something else. So we're going to say, are we right for saying that? Is it really desktop Linux? And secondly, is it a threat to other desktop Linuxes?
We are, and then while Ak sits in his pad, Jono is going to review the ACPAD, which is a little kind of guitar gizmo that you may like.
Sell it, Jeremy.
There was a survey done of licensing and the amount people use different software licenses in between 2017 and back to 2010, and what we've seen is the GPL drop off an awful lot, and more permissive licenses come rather more to the fore. We're going to talk about, is this a good idea? Why does everyone hate the GPL? Why does everyone hate freedom? And is it good that they do so?
And also, it's probably likely that Stuart Langridge is somehow responsible for this based upon his particular level of iPhone scale selling out.
And now, Bad Voltage.
So, on with the news. What's happened this week? Well, I got one, first of all.
Do it.
The Guardian the newspaper did a report on a problem in WhatsApp, which they called a backdoor. Right, and as far as I can tell, every security researcher on the globe has come back to them and gone, it's not a backdoor. What they've done is a perfectly sensible UI trade-off, you morons. And what you've done, The Guardian, is you've made a bunch of people go, I don't trust WhatsApp, it's got a backdoor in it, at which point they'll all flee to using SMSs or Facebook Messenger or something considerably worse. So Zeynep and a bunch of other people, Bruce Schneier's on the list, 70 or 80, I think, security researchers have put together an open letter which says, do a retraction, The Guardian, you morons. And The Guardian have said, nothing.
Really?
Yep.
That's the interesting part, I think.
Yeah. I think of The Guardian as like one of the last truly great news organisations. I'm surprised by that.
This is what has genuinely surprised me about it. If it had been someone else, I could think, fine, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
And they made a mistake. You can see how it would be misinterpreted. It is definitely a security versus convenience trade-off that WhatsApp have made. The point is, it's not even a thing they've done accidentally. It's not a bug. They've deliberately decided to do this because it's probably better in the long run. And it's certainly not a backdoor, which implies it was put in deliberately in order to compromise people's data.
Yes.
And that's what everyone's up in arms about. And it surprised me that The Guardian, of all people, who have got, a reasonably long history of standing up for doing the right thing in terms of security and privacy and that sort of thing. Look at them being involved with Snowden and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, everyone up in arms about it. The Guardian have done nothing.
Come on, Guardian, that's ridiculous. Compromising. You went from being a newspaper that my nan used to read all of the time, right? And she was a bit nuts. So I didn't have much of a high view, to being a newspaper that's genuinely brilliant because of what happened with Snowden, to now being a bit crap again. So you got to yank your bootstraps up, Guardian, and fix that.
Yeah. I wonder whether it's just, being reluctant to climb down.
Who would possibly exhibit those behavioural tendencies?
Wait for later in the show, ladies and gentlemen, when you'll see whether Jono Bacon feels like this.
What's next? Jeremy, have you got any news?
I do. So this one's from the Register, and it was that Google revealed that all of its servers contain some custom security silicon to do some authentication and identify their servers to themselves and things like that. What's interesting to me here isn't that Google is making custom silicon for security. I think all technology companies used to rely on other technology companies to do this, and this is what I think is interesting here. And the one quote that stands out to me is, "It's an unusual time in our industry where many of the most interesting server, storage, and networking advancement aren't advertised, don't have a sales team, don't have a price list, and actually are often never even mentioned in public. The largest cloud providers build their own hardware designs, and since the equipment is not for sale, it's typically not discussed publicly." So you can see, I think Amazon has done this with Glacier, but I think you're starting to see more and more innovations in the industry not being offered as products but being offered as services, because that's how companies think they can better monetize them. And that's a really big shift in the technology industry, I think, and I am curious how that works out long term.
It's kind of worrying from an open source point of view, right? Because you're now in a position where you say, we want to offer a service like this, but you don't have to buy it off some company who wants to use you as a product. You go, well, we can't because we haven't got the hardware, and we're not allowed the hardware, and we don't have the resources to build it.
It does have that interesting question, which is, what does the services model mean for open source? Because on one hand, arguably, the cloud is a good example. The cloud has become incredibly popular in recent years, and that has spawned all kinds of different open source projects, and I think that's generally been quite good. But on the other hand, because people are running to containers and the cloud and whatever else, does that mean that people are losing, like they have short-term open source freedom, but they're losing the long-term benefits of open source that we've seen elsewhere, where you're actually running your own kernel on your own hardware and that kind of thing?
I think in the short term, we're definitely getting some cool technologies out of it, but long term, I have some very serious concerns, I would say.
I wonder what... Did they talk about what that hardware is actually like? I mean, what does it do? Is it just like literally it's just a security...
silicon works alongside cryptographic signatures employed over low-level components like the BIOS, bootloader, kernel, and base operating system image to authenticate legitimate Google devices at the hardware level.
So is it just ROM with a key in it?
They don't go much further than that into exactly technically what's going on, but maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be that sort of thing. I mean, admittedly, I'm not going to get you to design it, Bacon, but that's the sort of principle. This is doing the same sort of thing that Secure Boot is doing, but they're wiring it in a hardware level. So, it seems like a useful thing. And to be honest with you, it seems like the sort of thing which wouldn't actually be that useful to us anyway. It's only going to work as part of a concerted, we've got really strong control over our hardware plan. But nonetheless...
Well, I think it would be interesting to anyone building a large data center.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyone building...
It would not apply to Stuart's very noisy box sitting on his desk. It would apply to large companies.
I thought you worked in a data center. The amount of background hum you have in your microphone at times.
Shut up. It's fixed now. Anyone building a large data center could presumably just go to the same people who built this and said, we'd like to buy it too, right? I mean, it's not like Google built the chips out of sand.
Well, they designed it and manufactured it themselves, I believe, so you couldn't go buy it from whoever they bought it from. That's the whole point here, is that as very small amount of technology companies are getting larger and starting to do this, they're not sharing. Like, so Facebook shared the open compute stuff, obviously, so it's not all of the companies all of the time. But I think you're going to see more of this where they fix a very tough technical problem or one that's interesting only maybe to a few amount of companies. And before, you would have saw a company maybe spring up and do that thing, an enterprise company that only sold their products to a small amount of people. You would have saw a company spring up, where now I think companies are going to start doing that stuff internally because they see a competitive advantage in doing so. And that's a shift for our industry.
You know, I would... and an open compute is mainly racking, right? And it's mainly... I think it's mainly racking and specifications around certain types of standardization in hardware. But
that's all it is at the moment, but I don't think that's what they're limited to. It's just as far as they've got. Presumably, if Facebook came out with this thing and saw some benefit in other people being able to be involved in it, they'd just get it involved in OCP.
You mentioned Facebook right there? I'd like to talk about Facebook. By the way, before we go on, we have to get Garrett on the show to talk about this hardware stuff, because I'd like to hear what he thinks about it.
I'm curious as well, yeah.
Moving on, We had our 2017 predictions on the first show of Season 2, the last episode, and I was roundly mocked for my prediction that I predict that Facebook will build some kind of VR experience given their acquisition of Oculus for $1.2 bazillion dollars. And some news was shared on the Bad Voltage Twitter thing by Rob Reynolds. Thanks for that, Rob. To a link to a Mashable article where basically Facebook are building something called the Oculus Home app. And it's only available for Gear VR users, but it says Oculus Rooms first brings you to the same virtual apartment displayed when using the Oculus Rift. Then when you're ready to launch into a social encounter with someone you're connected to on Facebook, you simply select the party option and you're brought into a new virtual space with 3 distinct areas. You can create an avatar and you can communicate with people. So my piece of news for this week is ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha, you're wrong. Yeah,
now,
so isn't that cool?
Allow me to make one tiny attempt to climb back out of this, right?
Okay. Yeah.
not wanting to go down without a fight. If Second Life were to build a thing where you could chat in Second Life by, find your Facebook friends, in the same way that a whole bunch of other stuff does. Almost every social service has a way of going, link this up with Facebook and find my Facebook friends. That wouldn't itself be Facebook putting Facebook in a virtual environment. It's just being able to contact your friends in a virtual environment. As far as I can tell, this is the same thing. The fact that Facebook themselves are doing it is not the point.
I would argue the fact that Oculus is owned by Facebook suggests that it is somewhat central to the Facebook strategy. The question is whether it ships in 2017.
No, the question is whether it's shit in 2017, which
I think it's almost certain that it's going to be shit in 2017. So I'm not worried about that. My prediction wasn't whether it was any good, because it's almost certainly poo. So, but quite exciting, I think. And I think it's quite exciting what's interesting to me is that it's available for the Gear VR thing, as opposed to only for the Oculus.
Yeah, that is interesting, actually.
Which seems stupid to me. Like, PlayStation VR only available for Xbox. So
nobody's got an Oculus.
I think a few people have got them.
Not many. They're really expensive.
I think the same people who bought the Oculus bought like Google Glass and.
Also, what they may have done is they've probably drawn a Venn diagram and gone, okay, people who bought an Oculus, people who have friends, and the crossover between those two things not that big.
It's like a bronies network.
End of the news.
End of the news, yes. Regular listeners will know that I'm a bit of a musician, while my oral interests, that's oral with an A, you sickos, are mainly about playing. I'm also interested in the tech side too. One such example is the Kickstarter curiosity, the ACPAD. The ACPAD is, it's a little unusual to describe. It's basically a thin plastic sheet of buttons that sticks to the front of an acoustic guitar. Said buttons can then be mapped to sounds on your computer with MIDI that can be triggered while you play your guitar. This opens up interesting musical combinations where you play your guitar strings but then trigger different sounds in conjunction with them. Now, to be clear, this doesn't change the sound of the guitar itself. This isn't like a distortion or a wah pedal. These sounds are entirely separate and are simply triggered by the buttons on the ACPAD. So you can think of it as kind of like a drum pad machine that's glued to your guitar that can trigger all kinds of different sounds. In terms of features, the unit itself has 8 touchpads, 10 preset buttons, 2 looper channels and 2 slider faders. It's got a USB port for charging, built-in Bluetooth, and some neat-looking blue LED lights. It's thin, and while it feels pretty well made, it does also feel a bit on the flimsy side, although that's kind of expected with really thin products, like the iPhone. It affixes to your guitar in a pretty lo-fi way, with some sticky patches that you remove and plonk on the front of your guitar. Fitting it to my guitar on my Ovation was pretty quick and simple. Interestingly, while the unit is thin, it does awkwardly get in the way a little when you're playing. When I'm strumming, the pick will catch on the side of it, so I need to strum a little further along to avoid it. Connectivity was a breeze too, with the ACPAD providing great instructions and tutorial videos to get it connected with Bluetooth and then mapped as a MIDI device, and it worked with any MIDI compatible software. Playability-wise, the buttons are surprisingly responsive and satisfyingly touch-sensitive. I found myself noodling around with the ACPAD and my sample set of sounds pretty well, and this is when I was struck by the dilemma of this product. While it is a genuinely amazing tool in the hands of those who know how to use it, it will take a lot of time and possibly acid to accomplish any kind of decent results. You see, when you watch videos of people really rocking the ACPAD, you are absolutely stunned by the musicianship and elegance of someone seemingly playing an orchestra of sounds with just two hands. This is why I bought the ACPAD. I was so inspired by what I saw, I thought I've got to have one. The dilemma is that to achieve those results will take a lot of time, energy and practice. And using a device that's really blazing the trail for something new, there's not a lot of content to help you get spun up. So, while the ACPAD is a great product, and one that could really revolutionize live music, it really is kind of a bizarre and unusual tool, and it requires a lot of time and effort to put into it. So, what is the bad voltage verdict? The ACPAD is a genuinely innovative, well-built and inspiring addition to the world of music technology. In the hands of the proficient, it could really change the game for live musicians, but only get this thing if you're willing to invest not just the money, but also the time.
Now, to be clear here, I fully endorse the name of this particular item. However...
yeah, the fact that you kept saying ACPAD, it just... I'm not even going to say
I never even thought about that, by the way.
However, to be clear, the target market for this is someone who says, okay, here's my original burnt orange 1971 Gibson Les Paul, right? And what I want to do is spend $449 turning it into one of those plastic guitars out of Guitar Hero with a button on it. Who wants this thing?
I was going to say, it's almost $500, and on top of that, a 2-month lead time to actually get one it's definitely not for the faint of heart. And
yeah,
the first thing
I honestly don't remember how much I paid for it. I think it was a little bit less because it was a Kickstarter thing. But have you guys seen someone actually playing it?
So I was going to say, the first thing I thought when I watched the demos was I was surprised it didn't have an actual pickup for that price.
Yeah.
But after that, while it looks really, really interesting, I wouldn't call it complicated, but the learning curve, it's not even steep. It's like a cliff face, because you basically have to relearn how to strum completely differently while also... So, like, the Billie Jean is on their site, and there's some other stuff on YouTube, are really genuinely very cool. So to go see what someone could do at a live show with this thing is interesting and fascinating, but the amount of work involved is just astounding.
I think that's the... You look at the videos. I did not make the Guitar Hero comparison idly, right? When you watch those videos of someone playing Through the Fire and the Flames.
Through Fire and Flames,
right, on expert mode, and their fingers are moving that fast at 60 frames a second, can't keep up, and it's just a blur, right?
Yeah.
It looks like that. But except you're playing the actual guitar as well at the same time. And the worst thing about it is, as far as I can tell, do you remember, I don't know whether they had these in the US, right? Jono, you'll remember these. When we were kids, you used to be able to get a little thing that sat in your car with buttons on it, and then you could press the buttons and it would make a sound like you were machine gunning the car in front of you.
Oh, yeah.
Or it would throw a hand grenade or something.
Yeah. I do not remember these.
Exactly, right. Yeah, they were a 9-day wonder for literally 9 days in about 1985, I think. And it does seem rather like this is some kind of 21st century MIDI equivalent of that.
It basically is. It just comes with sticky bits to glue it to a guitar.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, isn't it like one of those keytar things that you see? I can't. I mean, it does seem very cool watching things, but I can't see how it becomes anything other than just a novelty.
Well, this is the thing.
It's like I play an accordion.
Well, no, because I mean, a lot of times, I don't know if this is popular in the UK as it is here, but you'll see, especially on weekdays where they don't want a live entire band to have to pay for that, they'll just have a guy sat with a guitar. For those particular cases, this is actually a really cool device.
Now, they have a similar thing in the UK, but normally the guy's got a little short dog with a Union Jack waistcoat on it and a drum strapped to his back.
The thing is, I think it's like I play the acoustic guitar quite a lot, just mainly when Jack's bathing, right? And it's just me and a guitar. And one of the things I do like about this is the idea that you can accompany yourself while you're playing.
Right.
And the people who can, like the Billie Jean video is a brilliant example of that. It just looks amazing when you watch it.
Right.
There's no question in my mind that if you look at that and you think, I would like to do that, I would like to be able to tap buttons and play music in addition to I'm playing the guitar, The ACPAD is about as good as an implementation of that as you can get. It's a tiny bit thick, like I say, where the pick sometimes scrapes against it, but that's a relatively small issue. The question is whether you're willing to put that level of effort in. It's funny because I somewhat arrogantly looked at it and I thought, I've been playing guitar for years, I'll be able to figure it out. And I plonked it on, and the first thing I thought was like, there is no way I'm going to be able to do this with it. Like,
do I just use my third and fourth hands to press the buttons on this?
Yeah, I'm going to use my Gene Simmons tongue.
Although it kind of changes the dynamic of acoustic guitars in that sense now, because now you just walk into Jack's taking a bath, you walk in with your guitar. Now you got to bring a laptop with Ableton Live on it and set it up.
Right.
It kind of changes the whole dynamics. Also, make sure you get a webcam screen in this case. Cover the webcam.
You know how serious music question here, right? You know how occasionally you'll run into people who can play both the lead line and the bass line on the same guitar at the same time.
Oh,
so Nick Drake could do it, Lucas Strignoli can do it, a bunch of others. That seems like I'm always terribly impressed when I see people do this. And they're accompanying themselves in the same way, and it seems like, you know, approximately the same amount of effort. So you didn't need the toy; you just need to be better at the guitar.
Right. This is probably designed for people who are like, the guitar is no longer challenging enough for me.
Yeah.
So,
who says this? Who goes, right, okay, look at the world's greatest guitarists. I have surpassed them. Time to move on in my own living room. Marty
Friedman, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Yngwie the Donut Malmsteen.
Yngwie Malmsteen, probably. On the other hand, I'm not sure I can see Yngwie Malmsteen going out and buying one of these, if I'm honest.
No.
But, I mean, can you honestly imagine, instead of just noodling about with it, buying it as a toy for yourself, if you were at a friend's house at Christmas or something like that, or everyone's round at yours at Christmas, and you bust out the guitar and people are singing a bit and you're having an evening and a couple of beers, can you imagine strapping this thing on and also accompanying yourself with it?
I think it's too early to tell for me, personally, because I haven't played with it that much, and it's just been such a giant epic bucket of fail so far that I can't see myself using this in any meaningful capacity. I sound like a child playing the recorder for the first time. It's like that shitty flute YouTube channel. It's terrible. So I can't imagine, but I think with a bit of practice, I think once you get the hang of it, it's something that you'll be able to really... I get the impression that the learning curve is really steep at the beginning, but once you start getting the hang of it, you'll be able to do all kinds of stuff.
Right, technology question. Oh, go on.
Yes.
I was going to say, if you had to estimate how long in hours to be mildly proficient with this it would take, would you say
I'm
10,
guessing,
100, or 1,000? Like in that?
I'm guessing around 10 to 20 hours, probably to get started. I reckon you'd need 50 hours to really start doing it well. And a lot of it, I think it depends on, like, because you've got to be able to mentally break down, like, what can I do on the guitar so I can still tap the buttons? Because not everything is going to map well to playing with the ACPAD, because if you're playing something really busy on the guitar, you're not going to be able to move your hand away.
Now, on to Ack's question about the ACPAD while Ack is sitting in ACPAD.
Actual technology question. This is a bog standard MIDI device, right?
Yeah.
But presumably that still means that you'd still have to have it plugged into something. I mean, as Jeremy says, a laptop and a copy of Ableton Live, or some kind of MIDI device that knows how to put the sounds out or whatever. So
it's Bluetooth.
But you're no longer just an acoustic guitar anymore, right? You're an acoustic guitar and an amp and whatever.
Yeah, so
they're pretty clear about that, to be fair.
Yeah, they're clear. Like, it connects over Bluetooth, and then basically the Bluetooth becomes an input source for the MIDI software.
Oh yeah, no, bear with me. I'm not suggesting that they're misleading or mendacious about doing this. It's just, it seems to me that if you were building something which does this kind of thing, you wouldn't necessarily aim it at people with acoustics. Since the whole point of an acoustic is that it works when you're not plugged into the mains, right? You can just be in the street.
Not necessarily. I mean, a lot of people play acoustic guitars because they want the sound of an acoustic guitar, but they actually have electric acoustics. Like my Ovation guitar is an electric acoustic, so I can plug it into an amp. So not many people actually play acoustics and don't plug it into an amp that often, unless you'd like just sat around the house, just tatting around on it. But a lot of musicians have acoustic guitars that have...
Okay, fair play.
Yeah, but this is the reason. You see, You flirted with the idea of having an opinion about a musical topic again.
No. This is me. This is me playing my role as surrogate for most of the audience who also don't understand this stuff. So you can explain it to me in a really condescending way, but then they'll understand what you're going on about. So that's good.
I can't believe you just insulted our audience like that. Yeah,
but I mean, I think the thing which stands in my way, from your description, it sounds like the sort of thing that might be quite fun and you could get into and whatever.
Yeah.
And if it was $59, that seems reasonable. It's a monkey. That's really expensive.
It is. Yeah. It is definitely way too expensive. I can't remember. I'm actually looking up on my email, like how much I paid for it.
I could even say maybe 99 or 129, but $500 is.
Yeah, it's €449 on sale now. I don't know whether it was actually cheaper when you got it on the Kickstarter. Did you do some kind of early bird
quite a bit cheaper on the Kickstarter.
I bought it. It was €269.
Like $300.
So it's
still like $300. So I got a bit of a discount, but it's still. I'll be honest with you. It is way overpriced. It is definitely overpriced. It's too expensive. That thing should be, frankly, it should be $100.
Yeah, I can see, because then it can be kind of impulsive. And if you get into it and you think, you know what, this is just a bit too annoying and I'm not prepared to devote the time to it, and it goes in a drawer, it's not too much of a crisis. But $500 is that's a major piece of investment. You can buy a new guitar for that.
Yeah, particularly as it's...
And then play them both at the same time, since you're that good now with doing two things at once.
Have you seen that guy there's this guy who does YouTube videos, he plays two guitars. And he does like Super Mario Brothers, and he'll play both the rhythm and the lead. This guy's incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, so just like shitty flute.
Just learn to do that. So, apart from the price, would you say it's worthwhile for musicians who want to have a play with something?
I think for musicians who want to do something different, like if you want, particularly live musicians, like it reminds me of Muse, who are one of my favourite bands. They have this weird little guitar that you like stroke, and it makes these interesting noises, which is kind of like this in a way. And that's one of the reasons why I got this, because I thought I could create cool, like, live sort of stuff. I think if you want to do something like that, then definitely get one. It's brilliant. If you're just thinking, I fancy something new, I probably wouldn't get it. Unless you've got, like, buckets of Scrooge McDuck money lying around the house, then, which obviously I do. Not really. So
what we're saying is, if you're the sort of person who thinks, you know what our four-piece needs? A theremin, then maybe buy this instead.
So during the last show, the topic of ChromeOS came up, and specifically whether or not we thought it was desktop Linux. And as we started to kind of get into a little bit, God bless you, it seemed like we had some disagreements on this topic, so I thought it'd be interesting to maybe talk about it as a segment on this show. And yes. I think, is ChromeOS desktop Linux is a good question, but I think maybe even a better question, and we can discuss both, is if it's not, is ChromeOS a threat to what we consider traditional desktop Linux?
Oh, that is an interesting question.
Yeah,
so we can start with, is it Linux, and then if it isn't, segue to...
There is a bit of a problem with this discussion, in that it's not very long, because is ChromeOS desktop Linux? No. Is it a threat? Yes. Next segment.
Segment over. This will be the first segment we've ever done in under a minute. Boom.
Sadly, it will not be that segment in under a minute. I don't know. I think that the assessment of whether it is desktop Linux is a purely emotional one on our part.
No, it isn't. It's completely objective.
Nope, it's completely emotional. It is. We're all sitting around a drum circle deciding that it's not desktop Linux. Oh. Because I think we look at it from the perspective of, like, we have a sense of, when we say desktop Linux, we're actually conflating a few different things. There's the idea of Linux that runs a desktop, right? But then what I think it's really about is this a project that is available upstream that lots of people can participate in? Do they have a Planet site that's associated with it?
No,
can you build apps?
No, none of this is the truth.
I think that is I think that's intrinsically what we think of when we think that it isn't, because ChromeOS is basically, yes, it uses Google. Like, calling ChromeOS desktop Linux is like calling a WWF wrestler an athlete, right? Technically, it's the case, but in reality, it doesn't really feel like the case.
No, so it's not the case.
So, by your definition, is Chromium OS desktop Linux the open source version of ChromeOS?
No.
So is
Why
it
not?
based on the Linux kernel?
It doesn't matter whether it's based on the Linux kernel.
Well, hang on. Let's start with the
is
term,
it a
the
desktop
term desktop
operating
Linux.
system?
I believe Linux is a good place to start, right?
Well, okay, so a knockdown argument against that then. You remember a few months ago, we talked about, Google announced, and we briefly talked about, they're working on a new operating system kernel called Fuchsia. Right?
Yes.
No one knows much about it.
Right.
If they decided to switch ChromeOS to use that kernel instead of Linux tomorrow,
Right.
nothing would change about the user experience of ChromeOS at all.
Agreed.
If your argument is, well, it's still desktop Linux at that point, then your argument is fucking stupid. However,
We didn't say if Google completely rewrites the kernel transparently with no other changes, is it desktop Linux? That's a different question. We asked, is it desktop Linux? If Linus suddenly wrote a new kernel, would Fedora be desktop Linux then?
If your
wild
argument
speculation.
If your argument is it's desktop Linux because it's got a Linux kernel and it runs a desktop of some kind, then that definition is meaningless. Right?
That's what I was saying. Like, when we say desktop Linux, we're not talking about is it a desktop that runs on Linux.
Correct.
We're saying that there is a whole set of social dynamics that we associate with the term desktop Linux that Google, like Chrome OS, does not adhere to.
Yeah, but
so therefore, we don't think of it as desktop Linux.
Yeah, but you basically
in the same way that
define it as just being the social dynamic stuff, because otherwise Node.js is desktop Linux, right? It's contributory upstream, and everyone works on it, and people work together.
But it's not a desktop.
That's the thing. I mean, if you look at what Chrome OS or Chromium OS is, it's a Linux kernel, Linux drivers, a window manager, and Chrome or Chromium, depending on which one you're talking about. So while it doesn't tick some of the traditional desktop Linux boxes, it checks enough boxes to kind of really be a non-traditional Linux desktop.
Then the term desktop Linux is meaningless.
I think
you say, okay, I'm running desktop Linux. Where do I get apps from? Which applications can I run? The answer is don't know, because that's meaningless. It's like going, I'm running a thing with a letter A in the name, and you go, look, it's the year, 2017 is the year of desktops with an A in the name. Who fucking cares?
I think it's desktop Linux. It's meaningful in the sense of, I think when we think of desktop, we think of a fat client user experience with a mouse and a keyboard, right? And so Chrome OS,
which Chrome OS already isn't.
Well, Chrome OS basically fits that criterion. The fact that you're running
utterly
applications.
Does not.
You're running like full screen applications on a laptop with a mouse and a keyboard. So that's disconnect it from the internet, and it's basically useless. I would argue that
newer versions are much more
any operating system from the internet today, and it's basically useless. We talked about this a while back. It becomes a paperweight.
It does not become a
computers are crap when they're not connected to the internet. They're completely uninteresting, with the exception of the Endless computer, which is brilliant.
Oh, will you shut up? Honestly.
So I think another interesting perspective for this question really too is it's clearly not desktop Linux to ACK, and I think anyone who's a hardcore long-time Linux user looks askance at it as not Linux. If you search around what the mainstream kind of technical media thinks, you get a bunch of headlines like the one from CIO from a couple of months ago. Desktop Linux starts 2016 with a bang thanks to Acer and Chrome OS.
Right.
Well,
I think the mainstream technical media and mainstream technical people definitely think it's desktop Linux.
Let me give you another example. Which
go ahead. Before you go on to another example, I should be clear here. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Right, I think Chrome OS is a jolly good idea. I think the thing that we were hoping would happen when desktop Linux came to the fore will not happen if Chrome OS does it, and it wouldn't happen if Android on the desktop had gone anywhere either. Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad.
Well, the other interesting.
It's a competitor to what we're currently running, but maybe it's a competitor we should switch to.
Well, that is, I think, why when we think, and when I say we, I think I'm talking about like Linux fans, open source fans. Well, there's a lot of open source fans who don't care about Linux and desktops, but people who care about what I would say the traditional Linux desktops, one care about, GNOME, KDE, XFCE, that kind of thing. People don't consider it desktop Linux because it doesn't have the ecosystem part, right? Not everybody can go and build apps for it. Not everybody can. Or there's not an open ecosystem where you can improve the developer experience very easily. It doesn't really have the same community vibe that those other desktops have. What's interesting to me is Xandros. Xandros, when that first came out years ago, children listening to the show won't know what Xandros was because it was like Ubuntu years ago. It was like if you take the principle of Ubuntu and lock it behind in a plastic box and you can't change any of it, right?
Very brightly coloured plastic box.
Very brightly coloured plastic box that basically looked like Windows. It looked like kind of a North Korean implementation of Windows, and it was not community centric in any way whatsoever.
No.
But everybody considered it desktop Linux.
Well, here is the thing, right? This is Langridge's stupid reductio ad absurdum. But I quite like this. If I were... You have to not just laugh at this out of the bat. You've got to think about it.
Not going to happen.
Right? Imagine...
Seems unlikely, but we'll try.
I give you a machine. It's running the GNOME desktop. It's running the GIMP and Inkscape and LibreOffice and Chromium and Firefox and Audacity and all the stuff that you normally run, but it's actually using a FreeBSD kernel. Is that desktop Linux? And the answer is yes, it is.
No, it isn't, because it's not Linux. It's open source desktop.
Is there any sentence that anyone has ever used the words desktop Linux in which wouldn't equally be fulfilled by that GNOME FreeBSD machine?
No, I mean, people...
So you would consider FreeBSD running GNOME, which meets every single thing you just said, meets every qualification as Linux?
In any sentence where anyone uses the phrase desktop Linux... Right, you could give them, the people who are asking a question about desktop Linux, that GNOME FreeBSD machine, and it would fulfill their requirement.
You're right.
So it would fulfill their requirements while still not being desktop Linux. See, words have meaning so that we can all communicate and understand what we are saying to each other. So we just randomly make... So what you're saying is, in your alternative fact world, FreeBSD is Linux.
This is, I think, the point Jono was attempting to make.
Don't even try to bring me in on this.
No. I'm defending your point of view.
You're ridiculous, Larry.
I'm defending your point of view here. That when people say desktop Linux, what they really mean is the open source desktop.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. That is exactly what I'm saying. And you're right, Ag. Like if you were to take something that looks and feels like Ubuntu or Fedora and it's actually running FreeBSD, people would, if they didn't know that, they'd call it desktop Linux. We're talking about the open source desktop, really.
Yeah.
So
my argument is the people are using the phrase desktop Linux incorrectly to mean the open source desktop, and therefore ChromeOS doesn't qualify. If we change it so people use the phrase desktop Linux correctly, which means a device with a Linux kernel on it and some kind of desktop on top of it, then sure, ChromeOS is that and my GNOME FreeBSD desktop is not.
Okay.
But then... who cares? What generalizations can you make about anything which includes all of ChromeOS, Android on the desktop, Android on phones, Ubuntu, Kubuntu? What can you say about it? What's the point in even talking about it? I mean, as I understand it, the PlayStation 3 was a BSD kernel underneath. The Mac has an open source kernel, for goodness sake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what we're talking about really is we're talking about the open source desktop. And I think we'd all probably agree that ChromeOS is not something we would consider. It's technically open source, but it's not. It's what I would say is source available, but it's not really open source. And so I think that's why we think of it in a different context to GNOME and KDE and whatever else. But it's technically.
Wouldn't you say that Ubuntu, as an example, is going in a direction that is similar, if not indistinguishable, long term on the desktop?
Yep.
Yeah, sadly.
So you think that in the near to mid future, depending on how you define near, Ubuntu desktop will not be desktop Linux?
I think if Ubuntu gets to a point where it doesn't have the same collaborative underpinnings that it once had, and it maps to ChromeOS. So basically, only Canonical's doing work there. Then I wouldn't consider it open source desktop.
In the same way that Chrome is. I mean, as far as I'm aware,
right.
You can't contribute to You can contribute to ChromeOS with code, but you've got no influence over the direction. And Ubuntu is roughly the same way. There'll be a bunch of Ubuntu people who consider that to be an unfair characterization, but I think it is.
Hang on. Listen. Do you hear that?
Go on.
We haven't had an interruption about Canonical.
Goodness. Once again.
This is the second time.
I think a more interesting point, getting back to my second question, I think Ubuntu is probably the most popular traditional desktop Linux distribution, especially if you consider all the other distributions built on top of Ubuntu.
Yes.
Yeah.
And ChromeOS is rapidly passing all desktop Linux as far as numbers of adoption.
Yeah.
So if the most popular and the second most popular Linux-y desktops are not traditional open source desktops, what does that mean for the future of desktop Linux? That's a worrying trend, I think.
I hate to say it, but I think I feel quite guilty for saying this, but I think desktop Linux had its chance and it didn't succeed.
I would agree with that.
And in terms of mass consumer adoption, I think that you will always have, like, I joked about Endless earlier on, but I love what they're doing, how they're using GNOME, they're using Flatpak and Electron, and they're building something that's different. But it's interesting the way they're working with the upstream GNOME community is quite different to the way Canonical did, for example, because I think we've discovered that really interconnected relationship between a company like Canonical and the upstream is really delicate to balance.
Right.
In fact, I met up with Jonathan Blanford, who is a senior. He's like VP of engineering at Endless, and of course he was involved. He ran engineering at Fedora, and one of the things we had lunch one day, and one of the things we both said was, it's interesting the lessons we've learned over the years about what you wouldn't do, like building a similar kind of desktop moving forward.
Although, to be clear here, like, having tried Endless, I'm sure they've got big plans, but at the moment it hasn't actually diverged very much from upstream GNOME. It's not like where Canonical, I think, ran into problems where they wanted to do something and upstream GNOME didn't. I mean, yes, they could have handled it better than they did, but nonetheless, it's where points of divergence came into place. And what Endless is basically GNOME with stuff on top.
Well, I think it's GNOME with a slightly different shell. The difference is that Endless has not tried to get that shell into GNOME.
Yeah.
And Unity was originally tried to be put into GNOME, and I think that's where the contention was.
Well, yeah, but that's the point. That's the opposite of collaborating upstream.
Well, I think what they're doing is they're saying it's open source, but we appreciate the fact that this is not something that the upstream project wants. I think the reason why they did that is they saw Unity like, we're not doing that.
I think that's exactly it. That they've said, okay, we're not going to try. I mean, it's not even as if they're going to go, okay, we want everyone upstream to be using us instead of what they're doing upstream. It's just, there's no point in trying to get our stuff in upstream. We'll basically carry it as a fork forever, and we're fine with that.
And that's completely okay.
And learn that through having seen Canonical's attempts to work cooperatively with upstream and, be handled badly on both sides.
What's going to be interesting, I think, is whether it's a threat or not, is since desktop Linux or open source desktop started getting, I would say, usable, which I would say was the GNOME 2 era, there's been a significant amount of meddling from companies in that. And now companies are not focused as much on those open source desktops. I'm curious to see how far they go without companies trying to, instill their will on it. Because in the last few years, I would say that the KDE project and the GNOME project and Elementary have done incredible work. And they haven't had a lot of companies behind them. They're just getting on with it.
What concerns me there is the lib paper sizes problem, to some extent at least. I know we've been talking about the paper sizes library for years and years and years and years and years as a handy example. One day I'm going to meet the chap who actually maintains it and say, sorry for using you as an example. I have no idea.
You talk, I'm looking it up.
But if you look at what we might call the new crop of desktops, so you've got Mate being run by Ubuntu Mate being run by Martin Wimpress, and you've got Solus being run by Ike, and you've got the Elementary team, and so on and so forth. They don't in general have companies behind them. They do in general have the flexibility and the nimbleness to be able to do new things on the desktop, which is great. But it's not clear to me who's handling the oh, my new camera plugged into this and it didn't work properly. Because they're not working at that low level, because basically to get that you need to pay someone to do it, and none of them have got any money.
Right.
And a lot of that heavy lifting of the unpleasant, brutal going through, making sure that the kernel works on new things, stuff is handled by companies paying someone to do it. And that doesn't happen as much if the new breed of desktop Linux, distributions, new breed of desktop Linux-based OSs, stops doing that. Chrome aren't going to do it because they don't sell it for use on standard devices.
Yeah, you're right.
You can run it on Chromebooks and that's it. It's the same thing as SteamOS, right?
Yeah.
People are like, well, SteamOS doesn't run on my desktop, and Valve are like, we don't give a shit. We built it to run on Steam machines. The fact that you can run it on your desktop is nice for you as like a bonus, but that's not what it's for. If that's what you want, download the Ubuntu client and run that. Right. Phone manufacturers is exactly the same. We're increasingly moving towards a world in which people build hardware, or people build software to run on particular hardware items, which is a more worrying threat to the open
really
source
where
methodology.
This industry started, right? We have almost come full circle in that regard, which is I find a little bit odd.
That's the thing. I think it wouldn't surprise me if there will be a resurgence in this, but it will be from a company that makes hardware.
Look at even Endless, right? They are, I don't know, and I might be unfairly characterising it, but they're building this to run mostly on the Endless computer, yes? I'm sure...
Not really. The Endless hardware is essentially, it's a reference hardware implementation.
Oh, that's good then. I mean, when I installed it, I moaned about a couple of little things in the installer, and Resiac popped up and went, oh yeah, sorry, no, we're going to get that fixed, or that's already on the cards, or whatever. So that's great. And I don't think they're going to be unresponsive to that, no problem at all. Yeah. But I didn't know whether it was primarily built to run on the Endless computer or not. And if you say it's not, then that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think what's going to be interesting to your point is, like, we had this at Canonical where we were trying to support 1 million different hardware configurations. And there was a certain amount of your mileage may vary. And I think what's going to have to move, I think what's going to happen is, and again, we could have only learned this from, I'm glad that the Unity thing happened, because on one hand, it showed what not to do. So I think Endless will do better because, to Jonathan Blanford's point, like, you know what not to do, what missteps to make, and that's just software. Like, that's just how things work.
Right.
And I think one of the things we'll learn is you've got to have hardware to make this work. Like, we knew this years ago. People just aren't willing to install operating systems unless you're a hacker, unless you're interested. And if you're trying to bridge to the consumer market, then people are not going to install an operating system.
Interestingly, right, this is not necessarily going to go down very well with everybody listening to this. But in general, when someone says, I'm thinking of getting into Linux, I want to run Ubuntu or something, what do? I always say, go and buy hardware with it on. Buy it from someone, buy it from Dell with the Sputnik developer laptops, or buy it from System 76. Or from Entraware, Zareason, whoever, right? No problem. Right. And then they'll come back and go, no, what happened was I bought this cheap £300 laptop from PC World, and I tried to install it, and the sound doesn't work. Linux is rubbish, right?
Right. Yep.
And as far as I can tell, that's almost always about price. People don't want to pay for the premium end of the market. So they're not going to buy it. I mean, I'm sure System 76 or Entraware would say, no, we've got cheap versions of the laptops, but in general, they're not prepared to pay for decent stuff and they want it cheap. But if we eliminate that bit of the Linux community, if we say, look, okay, you can't run Linux on cheap commodity hardware anymore, maybe we'd eliminate a lot of the complaints. Yeah. We'd also eliminate a lot of the people who find it really useful. So I'm not sure I like this idea, but something to think about.
So I'm going to end with a little bit of a disagreement, and I'm curious what the bad voltage community thinks, and it's maybe possible that this is another segment in another show, but earlier, Jono said that he thinks desktop Linux had its chance and its time has passed. I would say there's been no better time than now. With you look at the direction that Windows is going with not just privacy, but just some other decisions that Microsoft is making. You look at the direction that Apple is going with the latest MacBook Pros and the direction that macOS is going. I don't know that there's been a better time for desktop Linux than today. So I'm curious if people think, has the time for desktop Linux passed? Is it the time now? Was the time never? Which is certainly a valid opinion given the fact I'm curious what others think, though.
I would like to hear that as well. And just before we wrap, I looked up lib paper sizes. This is the project that has library of paper sizes. It's not being committed to in 7 years, by the way. It's been a while.
Yeah, but who the hell has invented new paper sizes in the last 7 years? Nobody, right?
That is a fair point. But it was created by Yves Arroy, and I think everybody should drop Yves an email and say thank you for lib paper sizes. So if you're listening to this, you need to send an email to yves@debian.org and just say thank you for lib paper sizes. And then that guy's going to get, or possibly woman, is going to get a very happy set of emails. Off you go. There's a company called Black Duck that does research into licensing every so often, and they published an interesting graph which struck my eye that Red Monk, Stephen O'Grady from Red Monk, put up on his Twitter feed, that basically showed how licensing share has changed from 2010 to 2017. And, you know, some things haven't changed that much, like the Microsoft public license, whatever. The BSD license hasn't changed all that much. The GPL version 3 hasn't really changed a great amount. It's gone up a little bit in 2017 compared to 2010, but it's been around longer. But what was interesting is that the GPL 2, the usage in 2017 is below half of what it was in 2010. Yeah. And I thought that was quite interesting. Like, what does that mean? I mean, I have a few thoughts on it, but I'm curious, what do you guys think about that general trend?
Well, you also couple this with most of the stuff on the graph, as you say, shows not much change. But the use of the MIT license has tripled, and the use of the Apache license has at least not doubled, if not over doubled. So essentially what this graph is showing is a shift from copyleft licenses to permissive licenses, right?
Yeah, but not all permissive licenses, because BSD is actually down, as are a couple of the other permissive licenses. It's specifically those two permissive licenses, which I think is interesting.
Apache and MIT, yeah.
Now, it's interesting, because I shared this on Twitter, and rather unsurprisingly, it kicked off a bit of a row with certain people. A couple of people, I'm sure they won't mind me mentioning their names, because they're good people, but Simon Phipps and Sweet Shark, who Bjorn from, I think he's still at Canonical, who maintains LibreOffice.
LibreOffice, yeah.
In Ubuntu. They challenged this assertion, because my basic viewpoint was it seems like the GPL has failed to capture the commercial market, because I would argue that the open source the commercial open source space has grown significantly since 2010, and the fact that GPL usage is down is consistent with what I've seen just in my general business and experience, that people are just not comfortable in licensing a code base that's got any kind of business relationship as the GPL. They're just too nervous about it. And they're primarily licensing, from what I've seen, under the Apache license.
Right. Well, I think that is as a result of you have very large companies, and let's take IBM as a good example here, that now have been doing open source for a very long time and understand it very well, and they're dumping a lot of money in with the expectation as a business that they get a lot of money back out. And I think those companies have decided that they don't want GPL to be what they base their businesses on.
Right.
And it seems to me that part of that is because of the business decisions that they make, but part of it, I think that the Free Software Foundation, with what they tried to do with the GPL 3, I think turned a lot of companies that maybe they could have got on board turned off. I think...
You know, what I'm curious about here as well, and this is I'm going to say this quite carefully because I don't want to offend anyone, but I'm going to. I hate gingers. No.
Didn't you get enough of a kicking last time?
I did. That guy hasn't come back, I don't think, since I made that comment about you, which was not meant. I love Stuart Langridge, like any man loves another man. But no, I would say that one of the things that we used to criticize the Free Software Foundation about a bit on Lug Radio, and I think we've shared it on Bad Voltage as well, is that some of their strategy has been, at least it used to be, I think it's better now, but it used to be a case of bollocking people for not being free enough. And I think what's happened in recent years is you've got a lot of businesses who are starting up and they don't really understand the free software crowd as much. And they know that the free software crowd are very much into like adherence to free software principles across the board. And I think a lot of businesses say, I don't really understand that crowd. They use the GPL. I understand open source, so I think I'll go Apache because it feels safer. Because you might incur the wrath of the community. And I wonder whether some of that is just, it's a cultural difference. Like, back when Canonical started out, there was a fairly clear understanding between, I would say, the business world and the free software world, because the two were quite interlinked. Because if you hired anyone, they were invariably a Debian contributor or they were a Linux contributor in some way. But that's way different these days. Right. And I wonder whether that's part of the reason why, you know, and then you see things like the Bradley and Linus spat on LKML. I wonder whether all that kind of stuff further kind of like muddies the GPL as a license that businesses not necessarily don't like, but they're just kind of a bit weirded out by.
I'd agree with that. The GPL is, if you, in order to use the GPL, you've got to ask the question, am I in compliance with this license? And that's a harder question to answer than it is for a more permissive license, by definition, because the GPL provides extra requirements, right?
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of people think that I'm not even interested in getting into a discussion about that question. If I have to have a discussion about this, I've already lost, right? If we have to do a bunch of due diligence work, then that's just really annoying, not interested in that. And then you combine that with the fact that the GPL is increasingly talismanic, increasingly a badge of the sort of people who will bollock you anyway, even if you release something out of the GPL for not responding to your bugs fast enough or for not doing a FreeBSD port. Well, not FreeBSD is a bad example, but, you know, make it available on Ubuntu, but not on Fedora or something like that. You just think, I'm just not going to wade into that. Just don't care. The other thing is we've seen the rise of a bunch of other communities who open source things routinely by default. It's just the default. You look at the Ruby community, the Python community already existed. The Ruby community did to some extent, but the Node community, the web front end JavaScript community, they're all open source by default. The thing you do is you stick your stuff up on GitHub, possibly put your license on it, possibly not. Right. The intent there is to go, yeah, it's fine, go ahead and use it, whatever. But they can't even be bothered to put a license on it at all because thinking about this is hard. They're not going to think about it twice as hard, which is what the GPL requires.
Well, and I think a lot of the shift, to your point, is as those communities change, I think both permissive and copyleft licenses value freedom. What they consider the freedom of is where they differ, right? One's really the freedom of the code, and one's really more the freedom of the developer. And I think as you have more and more developers coming on board that don't care about licensing, they're going to choose the kind of freedom that is freedom for the developer, not for the freedom of source code. Because these are not people steeped in open source. These are casual developers turning into professional developers that care about developers more than they care about open source for the point of caring about open source. And I thought the one interesting thing about the chart that is not necessarily just about permissive versus copyleft, but you look at GitHub was founded in 2008. These charts start in 2008. In 2008, well over 60% of all the repos in the study had a license. It's now well under 20%, and that's not a gradual decline. Almost all of that decline, in fact, I think all of it basically happened from 2008 to 2009. So I think as people just throw things on GitHub, they just don't care about licensing. And while they should, and I wish they did, I don't know how to change that.
Yeah, it's so that, and I think that would actually be an interesting topic for the show is to what extent should not just pin it on GitHub, but GitLab and Atlassian and whoever else strive to enforce licensing. That might be an interesting topic for another show, because is there a social responsibility in the community to have people understand and make an educated decision around it? Because, a whole separate thing. But elephant in the room question in my mind with this survey, or with this graph is there an issue with the GPL being understood or advocating for the GPL so people use it more? Because I think we would all agree that the GPL is an excellent license and it instills the principles that we think are really important in open source. But it seems like it seems like the business world just hasn't grokked it in a way that they feel comfortable with.
Speaking purely for myself, basically all the code I release is under permissive licenses, not because I don't want to enforce copyleft on people. I think it's a good idea, but because I can't be asked to think about it.
Right.
You know, I mean, I'm not just quoting my own feelings when I say that I think people are avoiding getting into the discussion, but I am equally, at least partially, quoting my own feelings because I'll stick something up
because they're your feelings.
I'll try and put a license on it. Sometimes, most of the time, it's just up there just in case someone wants to look at it. But the first time I think, okay, should I make this GPL? I think, oh, can I do that? Are all my dependencies GPL? Are any of my dependencies incompatible with the GPL? Don't know, don't care. I've already spent too long thinking about this. No GPL for me. How much more is it when the person who needs to answer that question bills me $650 an hour?
Right. Yeah. I'm curious to see what happens here because it just seems to me that part of it is that the thing that I think the GPL has got, which the other licenses don't have, is they have a much more impassioned set of license nerds.
Yes.
Like, by definition, the people at the Free Software Foundation are license nerds because free software is about licensing. And I just don't think you get that as much with the other permissive licenses. And I do think, like Jeremy's point about GitHub, I think there is we've talked about this on the show before, and there's a different generation of open source that's founded that doesn't care about licensing.
So a different generation
is too heavyweight.
I think a bigger problem, but if you can't get ACK, who used to be quite a free software advocate, let's go with, to care now, how do you get anyone to care, right? I mean, if that's where the current bar is, we're in trouble, I think.
You actually, thinking about it, you sold out in about 2010.
There you go, you see.
Which would suggest that this might be your fault.
The whole graph is my fault. Licensing is just one of the annoying taxes that people don't do. Free software nerds think of it as being really, really, really important. But it's really, really, really important in the same way that making your software available for translation is, that doing accessibility work in your software is. Everyone knows you ought to do it. Most people don't bother.
Right, that's fair. Speaking of bothering, I can't be bothered to talk about this anymore. Should we talk about something else?
And the smooth segues continue.
Yeah, so why don't we talk about Bad Voltage Live? Because we have some quite neat news about it. We mentioned in the last show that we're going to be doing it. We have a few more details to share. So it's going to be on, just so everybody knows, it's on Friday the 3rd of March, 2017, obviously, in Pasadena, at the SoCal Linux Expo conference in the US, obviously. We're going to be going on at 8 p.m. Everybody is welcome to come along and join us. It's going to be a huge amount of fun. And we have to give a huge shout out to Scale, first of all, for being our hosts, because they're wonderful people, and specifically to Ilan Rabinovich, again, for helping to grease the wheels and getting us there. But also, thank you to Ticketmaster and to Linode for sponsoring us. They're helping to fly us all out, and there's going to be some drinks and some good stuff going on. Yeah. So thank you for that.
So that's yes. 2 big thumbs up for all of those, because we couldn't do it without Scale's help. We couldn't do it without sponsors' help.
Yeah.
And we like doing the show, and people like watching us do the show.
Yeah, and we've started designing it, and I think it's safe to say it's going to be a really cool show. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah. There'll be some surprises in store. It'll be a little different to what you've seen before. It'll be somewhat similar to what you've seen before, but it's going to be a good time. And of course, like anyone who's been to a Bad Voltage show will know, it's not just about the show. It's also about hanging out after the show.
Yes, it is. So,
yes. Yes. So be sure to get out there. So 3rd of March, 2017.
3rd of March in Pasadena, California. If you're going, then you should consider going to the rest of Scale as well, because Scale's a really good conference.
Yes,
at least some of us are speaking.
Yes, I am.
No, I assumed you were.
Are you, Ak?
I didn't put in a paper this time, but last time I didn't either. Then I got corralled for the Ubuntu Minicon. So I don't know if that will happen again.
I'm almost certain you're going to be speaking at the Minicon. And you were corralled into the Weakest Nerd thing, or Weakest Geek, right?
I was, but the appeal of a quiz where you go on, people ask questions, and then Ruth Swaler wins, and that's what happens every year. I don't know.
I mean, some would say it's rigged. It's rigged. It's the mainstream liberal media with their alternative facts.
That's exactly what it is. No, it was good. It was good fun to do, but we should probably give someone else a chance this year. But yes, come along to Scale. I believe, have we got a ticket discount?
Yes,
code?
we are going to have one. I don't think we've got the code yet from... It was B Vault last time.
Yeah, so
we'll check with the line.
We should probably make sure that it's still B Vault.
But the tickets are so cheap anyway.
I was going to say, it's not.
Don't be scroungy idiots, okay, people. Go out and buy a proper ticket.
just go to Scale. You know it makes sense.
Jeremy, are you speaking at Scale?
No, I didn't submit anything this year.
Because Jeremy gave a brilliant talk at All Things Open, which was 20-odd years of Linux condensed into about 5 minutes, which was fantastic. And I think you should do that at some point.
You should.
Yeah, it was quite cool.
We'll just get you a soapbox and set up outside the building.
Sold. Yeah. I'll just do it.
One of the benefits is people will be able to see him.
Ouch.
So, yeah, do we have anything else? Go to the forum, community.badvoltage.org. We've had an uptick, lots of really cool people going there. And we've also got 2 new moderators we should highlight, Warren Hill and Joe, who are doing great work, keeping the conversation going. So go and hang out there. And next show...
I was just going to say,
we're going to have a surprise.
We have a little change for the next show, right?
Yeah. We're going to have a surprise guest. Should we say who it is?
I was going to say, are we going to fill them in now, or should we just hold the suspense for 2 weeks?
We hold the suspense, man.
Yeah, we're going to have a guest presenter on the next show. This is going to be a lot of fun.
We've talked about the idea of having a guest presenter in, and
we have someone locked in already.
This is our first.
Yeah. Yes, so stay tuned. All right.
I think it's going to be quite good.
Yes, I do. And if it's not, we'll blame that person for screwing up our show. So.
Right, thank you.
All right, people.
This has been Bad Voltage Series 2, Episode 2.
Yes. 2. All right, let's do it. I've got to go and have dinner with my parents because I'm in England. So bye-bye, everyone.